started at the beginning. The first meditation we had was, or as I said rather, the theme of this retreat was Journey to the Heart. And I went on or continued to explain that the reason for this is that in our baptism, as we are children of God, through being baptized, that character, that we are shaped forever in a way that could never be removed. So even the soul, for instance, God forgive, and God forbid, that is lost forever in hell, they will never lose their baptismal character. That's how permanent it is. And so in the fact that we are in the state of grace, it's possible to lose grace, of course, but the character is impossible to lose. And it's there that God dwells. So I then went on to talk a bit about the heart in Scripture, which is very different from the normal understanding culturally of the heart as simply being the emotions. The emotions are a very important part of who we are as human beings, and they certainly reveal to us something about the dispositions of the soul, but they're not the whole picture. It's the mind and the emotions and the will coming together. And then we went and looked through 3 examples in Scripture of different hearts. The patriarchs, so Abraham and Rebecca, and well, Rebecca's not a patriarch, but she's the wife of a patriarch. So, and we also looked at Jacob. So now I just want to talk about how we start looking into this, because the reason we're looking at these other hearts is ultimately to help us better understand our own, and by learning how to sift those moods, those flavors of our own hearts, we actually come to discern God's loving presence within us, which is always the aim of any retreat, of any Christian living. So now I just want to, in this meditation, go through, and the next one we'll be doing some more of this thinking, then we'll get back to some more examples, just bearing or being bearers of the beams of love. That loving is something we are all capable of doing. Sadly, sometimes you hear people say, I don't think I'm really capable of loving. And this is a tragic statement, but it's actually not true. All it means is that there's been so many barnacles or so much stuff, deposits has been cluttered in that person's soul, that they've never learned what it means to love and to be loved. One time I remember I was in America, and this is back in 2006, and it was in early August, and I went to visit one of my final states that I hadn't yet visited, Alaska. And Alaska is a truly beautiful state. So I went on this cruise. It was about a 6-hour cruise on a place called Resurrection Bay, and some of you may have heard of it. And I was just seeing all these animals in the wildlife there. And it wasn't in a zoo, just seeing whales and sea otters and seals and everything. Anyway, at one point, they took us in front of a glacier, and not an iceberg, a glacier. And the glacier was 1.5 miles wide and about 500 feet high. Now, 500 feet high, that's about 1.25 times the height of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And there was no other buildings, of course, around, because it's a glacier. And it was moving forward at the rate of about 10 feet per day, just sliding in, and chunks, massive tons of ice breaking every few minutes. So the ship was no closer than about 400 feet away, so a bit more probably, about 400 meters away, and they told us to be in complete silence. And I remember just watching the ice, and massive tons of ice just breaking off and falling into the sea, and you see it happening, and then you hear the sound. That's how far away we were. I thought, during that half an hour, it was the closest thing I ever came to a natural liturgy. I felt I was in the experience or in the presence of something very, very big, much bigger than myself. And about talking to this sense of within us that I want to try and speak to a little bit. I'm afraid that I won't do it so well, but I want you, as I'm talking now, to start looking in your own life and to see what are those moments of love that have really touched you in a profound way and that have really opened you up. I don't mean falling in love with some handsome young fellow, 20, 30 years ago or something. That may have been part of it. But just that general sense of being in love, being in awe and wonder. Today's gospel, we heard that Jesus was astonished by the faith of the centurion. The Son of God did not lose what it meant to be able to be filled with awe and wonder. Let's move through, though, a bit more systematically. There is a desire within each of us, in the deep center of ourselves, that we call our heart. We were born with it, it is never completely satisfied, and it never dies. We are often unaware of it, but it is always awake. It is a yearning. It is the human desire for love. Every person on this earth yearns to love, to be loved, to know love. Our true identity, our reason for being, is to be found in this desire. The author here goes on, and I'm working from the book by Gerald May called The Awakened Heart. He's living beyond addiction. He's a psychiatrist who's very much written a lot of books also about spirituality and spiritual direction. He goes on to say, I think William Blake was right about the purpose of humanity. We are here to learn to bear the beams of love. There are three meanings of bearing love: to endure it, to carry it, and to bring it forth. In the first, we are meant to grow in our capacity to endure love's beauty and pain. Because love is never just the pleasant side. The real love always the beauty and the pain. In the second, we are meant to carry love and spread it around, as children carry laughter and measles, he says, so obviously says had a sense of humour. And in the third, we are meant to bring new love into the world, to be birthers, or midwives, you might say, of love. This is the threefold nature of our longing. But what often happens as we grow through in life? Well, thank God, you would hope that in our role as religious, as priests, that we are much more sensitive to the role of love than a lot of others. But we are no less capable, or no less rather susceptible, to so many other pressures or voices around us that actually seek to choke the voice of love within. And what are those voices? Well, the author here, in fact, Gerald May, starts to enumerate some of them. He says the difference between efficiency and love. So often in our day, you take a typical day of our lives. How many things do I have to do? I have to get up at a certain time. I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do that, I've got to do that, I've got to do the other, do this, do that, do that. And sometimes thinking about the day makes you tired just thinking about it. The moment I've gone down that groove, and I used to do this even when I was in Rome studying, I thought, I've got to cover this much material tomorrow, I've got to do that, I can't call home, I can't do this, because, and the study was important, the work that we do is important, but the need for love is even more important still. And if we're not careful, we can easily choke out that deep desire and longing, which is ultimately a deep desire and a longing for God Himself. All in the name of trying to be efficient. So I've got to do these jobs, because if I don't do them, then I'll be in trouble, or the community will suffer, or something like that. And serving is very necessary, grant you that. But very often there's an efficiency, and efficiency is not a bad thing, I'm not criticizing efficiency here, but that if we're not careful, the efficiency becomes the tyrant. And unfortunately, we do live in a culture that puts efficiency above love. In theory, everybody will say, love is the most important force in the world. Love is the most important feeling around, and most important reality. But what makes the world go round? Money makes the world go round. And anyway, and so one of the things that we're about to go into a lockdown in some parts of Sydney, we just heard that it actually makes people stop and think. What is more important in life? One of the things that many surveys were done last year with the COVID, and quite a substantial number of people admitted that being in COVID and being unable to go out and about has made them think more deeply about the real purpose of life. Others have become more explicit still, have become more spiritually minded, have actually prayed more. And here, it's not just people who would go to church normally, but people who were just not religious. They were praying more. Why? Because the very distractions that were taking them away from that attention to that deeper reality have now been removed. The efficiency versus love. The author here gives an example. He says, when I was a young parent, I just loved to see my children play and to do what they wanted to do. Great. And he says, but then I started wondering after a while, am I educating them right? Am I giving them enough discipline? In other words, he started, instead of just spontaneously going along with the flow of being a father and raising the children and responding to their needs as they came about, he started asking himself the questions, putting himself on a review card. How am I going? And in so doing, he began to lose sight of what it meant to be a parent and the joy of parenting, and now he's stacking himself up against, am I doing this? Am I going to give my children the best start in life? Am I going to do this and that? Because the efficiency questions started to take over him. Of course, it's possible to be efficient and to be also loving. And I know St. Josemaria Escriva, whose feast day is celebrated today, was one who very much loved work and believed we have to sanctify our work and to be as efficient as we can be in our work, but always meant to be done for love of God and love also of our neighbour. But the reality is that we often lose sight of that gentle voice of love. And so if in this time of retreat we are going to grow in some way, if we are going to actually listen and hear what this love, this voice of love, Christ himself, is going to say to us, then we need to be aware of those movements in our daily life as we're doing various things that call us to love. What is that voice? Functionality versus dysfunction. If I could, I would take charge of my life and make it turn out just right. How many of us have felt helpless and powerless in the way our life was or is, and we would like to have greater control? I can't. I have tried and failed repeatedly. I cannot adequately judge how loving I am, but I do know I lack efficiency. After considerable reflection, I have decided that I am dysfunctional in many ways. It's funny to hear him admit that. which is great. Fully functional people are organized, disciplined, able to get what they want out of life. Organization is out of the question for me. There are too many things going on, and they change so quickly I cannot keep up. The very idea of discipline makes me feel guilty. I have broken virtually every resolution I ever made. And as for getting what I want out of life, what I want most is love, and love comes only as a gift. All I can do is be willingly, actively open to receiving the gift. Here's a point very much worth stopping over. If real love is a gift, and it is, then it comes when it wants. Something comes into place. There's a moment of grace that is flowing. God doesn't ask us, I'm going to be speaking to you, Mark, at 3:15 this afternoon. Just be ready. It doesn't. He'll speak whenever he wants to speak. Sometimes there is an insight that will come to me in prayer, but other times the insight will come as I'm driving on the freeway, or I've nearly had an accident or something like that, and I just got out in the nick of time and I've realized something profound. But the insights come when we least expect them. So that attentiveness to the voice of love means being ready to put down whatever we think is so important, at least on the surface, in order to be listening deeper to what is going on. Some of the loveliest little acts of love I've seen in this retreat have just happened in the meal, when, we're praying less so. People doing little things for one another. They're attentive, they're sensitive, they're moving out of the way, they're mindful. There's all an openness there to love. You might say, at that moment, or during the moment on a retreat, it's probably easier to be open to love. Yes, probably is. Thank God. Let's hope so. Because if we're not open to loving, or more open to loving on a retreat, then God help us outside. But we're also listening to something. And what is it that in our normal day-to-day work, whatever that happens to be, that we're not always so attuned to it? Because obviously something else in my mind is telling me this is more urgent right now. And it isn't. It isn't. Still, I cannot shake the feeling that I should have done it all by myself. Some tight, addicted voice inside me keeps saying, you should be on top of things, in control. It is a cop-out to depend on grace. The voice is old and empty. I know it is not from my living heart, but it is powerful. For every failure in my life, I feel either guilt or shame, and sometimes both. Guilt says, if only you had done it better. Shame says, if only you had been better. After too many years of this, I admitted it. I am so dysfunctional, I can't even figure out how to become functional. And it is all right. So, what's coming out here as being a bearer of the beam of love is that love will touch us. That deep desire, deep yearning for which we were made, all of us, without exception. And it will come in the most unexpected ways, in the most unexpected moments. But do we have the ears to hear it when it is coming? And then when it makes itself present, do we know how to respond to it? In the three examples that we've seen so far, Abraham, Rebecca, and Jacob, we've seen that there's a spirit of faith in all of them, and they were attuned to God and to his movements. But we saw all too often, particularly with Rebecca and Jacob, that their own desires to orchestrate what they thought was right or how they thought things should be done often got in the way. Now in the end, thanks be to God, the Lord is so great that he knows how to bring good out of dysfunction. So don't lose heart and hope if you feel a bit discouraged that so often you drown out the voice of love coming in your own life, because God will still bring about good. But fundamentally attached to the voice of love is that we also find life and we find freedom. Life and freedom. Once again, some parts of Sydney are going into lockdown. Some people will be very despondent about all this because they feel that a limitation of their liberty is in fact a restraint on their freedom. I hope many others will find it that again, this is a chance to be more reflective once again and to listen to what is inside and what is truly important. Where is your treasure? Where is our treasure? And this is what's going to lead us to be attentive to the voice of love in our hearts. Because our heart also, there's other voices that are playing around in there. And the May here, the author, calls them addictions. By addictions, he doesn't mean, alcoholism or drug or sex addictions. He means any kind of habits that are compulsions rather than habits that have been established as virtue. So, for instance, he would call the habit of having to have everywhere so clean and tidy, it's a good thing, but it's an addiction. A person who doesn't know how to greet someone or be friendly with someone, because the moment they see a speck of dust, they've got to clear it off. That kind of compulsion, and he will call a whole lot of other things like that as well addictions. So, where is the treasure? Where is our treasure? And this is, if the treasure is love, and we really value love in our lives, then we will seek it wherever it makes itself present, or there's a hint that it's going to be present. If our treasure is something else, and I'm sure all of us can point to at various times that we've had other things as treasures, then they will be the thing that will actually draw our attention. An example that comes to mind, I won't say which priest this was, but there was a woman was telling me the story. He used to work for him, and halfway through the liturgy of the word, the priest had his phone on him, forgot to turn it off. So it's ringing and ringing, takes it out and turns it off and put it back in his pocket. And she said to me, "Mark, I don't know any other priest in the diocese who would have suffered so much more to turn that phone off rather than answering it, because he had trained himself compulsively to actually answer the phone, because he saw it, yes, this is a thing about service, it's about responding to somebody who needs you, but when we don't know how to control these things, it's like anything, they begin to control us. And so the phone is not, very many times, the voice of love. It's actually something else. It's like the person who is addicted to social media. Yes, social media is fun, it's good, it keeps us informed, but if I don't know how to control it, it will control me, and it's no longer love then. It's something else. In most cases, thank God, love and efficiency are not mutually exclusive. It is entirely possible to use your money charitably and still balance your checkbook, though I have not yet achieved either. It should be possible for your work to contribute to the welfare of others, and for you to receive adequate recompense for it, though most homemakers have yet to achieve it, because they live beyond their means, right? We're in a culture that tells us the more you have, the better you are, the happier you will be, you know? Whereas in fact, the more love you have in life, the happier you will be. And particularly, the more love of God, the happier you will be. We should be able to educate our children well while we are loving them, though in practice it sometimes feels impossible. It is easy to say, but very difficult to put into practice. Individually and corporately, no matter how noble our words about love may sound, we are conditioned to believe efficiency is everything. Efficiency is the standard by which every person and enterprise is judged in our modern developed culture. We weigh people's worth by how well they function. So true. The value of blue-collar workers is determined by their productivity. The worth of executives and professionals is based on their success. The merit of entertainers depends upon their draw at the box office. With such standards, the person disappears behind the product. We have even come to refer to children as products of their home environments. So he's really laboring this point because he knows that although we would agree with him very readily that love has to be the center of our lives, which will then open the way to life and to freedom, but in reality we are so locked in many ways to efficiency and all that that means. And so in this time of retreat, and we're nearly coming to the end of our meditation, I want to just give you some homework, if you haven't already written it for yourself, to see how well do I listen to the voice of love throughout the day. How has the voice of love spoken to me today? What have I done today that has come more from a compulsion or a sense of efficiency rather than because it's coming from the voice of love? Because these are well-established habits, and I've got them too. And I'm catching myself out and I think, did I really need to do that? No. But instead, I distracted myself from where I was. And as I listened carefully, I thought, I was actually happier. And as I distracted myself because the phone went or this happened, and I felt that I've got to respond to it, that I lost something for a moment at least of that inner space where I was inside. What is the invitation of love? If we want to set the relationship between love and efficiency in its rightful order, we must go beyond laws and proclamations. If we desire a more loving society, we as individual persons must return to the deepest common sense of our hearts. We must claim love as our true treasure. Then comes the difficult part. We must try to live according to our desire in the moment-by-moment experience of our lives. That is so hard to do. So hard to do, because you would think if we were living a monastic life that it would actually be easier because there's no distractions from the outside. But if you talk to the monks, you'll see, or any of the nuns, you'll see how tough it is on the inside. I have a good friend of mine who is, she was a prioress of a Carmelite monastery for many years, and we were talking about women living in a monastery and men living in a monastery and how they live the monastic lives. And I said, how do you find living in a monastery? She said to me, "Oh, Father, living in a monastery is a bit like living in a hothouse. It raises sometimes the tensions rise because the heat gets pretty warm, but it promotes growth. In other words, the pinpricks of each other's company. Now these are all women desiring to be saintly women, and they're getting on each other's nerves. She said, but for the men, I mean, the men have to work, because you lock men up in a monastery and not get out, they'll probably kill each other. You know? I said, you're probably right, you know. And that's why typically the men in a monastery, they work the land, they've got to run tractors, they've got to do this and that, because there's all that physical energy that's just got to be spent, but spent productively, you know. So there's no simple recipe to always listening to the voice of love. There's no simple recipe, but being mindful of it. Where is the call? And it's just a gentle nudge, it's a gentle hope that it makes me want to follow it, knowing that this is the more authentic me. So many in our culture, and we are on time, so many in our culture, particularly the young, but not just the young, I'm finding, people in their middle ages, or middle life, in their middle, of midlife age, they're trying to figure out who they are. And they're trying to work this out according to what I've done, or who I'm married to, or what I work for, that sort of thing. And that is not the identity at all. I am who I am. I am someone who loves. And with love, love cannot be given a reason for it. As Saint Bernard of Clairvaux says, love is the reason for loving. Love is its own satisfaction. Love doesn't need, it is the cause of love. Whereas the efficiency mentality, we always have to justify what a person is doing. You know, I've got to do this for these reasons. And if I don't have a reason for doing it, therefore it's not worth doing. So what he's getting at is that love is the most authentic call of our human existence. It's the first call. Often it comes buried under several different layers, and we need to pull those away. So you look at any addiction, and when you peel back all of the layers, so destructive behavior, peel back all the layers, and what you'll find below everything is a desire to love and to be loved in return. But that is often so buried that it's choked, and destructive behaviors and addictions begin to emerge. So in our role here, obviously we've made some progress along the way. We want to be mindful that although we've made some progress, our journey is far from complete. And so the tendency for the compulsions of efficiency can always come back. And we pray that the Lord now will indeed lead us another step forward towards Him, to be even more attentive to this nudge, this gentle prodding of love that He puts within us. And this is the image of God within us that He wants us to experience, because in experiencing that image, we experience Himself.